Russia loses 12,220 troops in one day. That headline, dated December 19, 2025, is just, it's more than a number. It's a shocking marker of the attrition we're seeing right now.
It really is.
What does a single, devastating 24-hour toll like that truly tell us about the strategic landscape? And how do we even begin to square those losses with claims of slow, grinding advances? That's what we're here to unpack.
You know, we really are.
Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. I'm Alex.
And I'm Aria.
Welcome to the latest deep dive from Defense Report. We're going to give you a sharp, no-nonsense breakdown of the latest in global defense news and strategic developments.
And today we are diving deep into data that, frankly, confirms a massive crisis of resources in the Russian military.
That attrition number is really just the jumping-off point, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. We'll be analyzing how Ukrainian forces have successfully engineered these major tactical reversals near places like Kupiansk and Lyman. It proves this positional war is anything but static.
And we're going deep on a strategic weapon that is now, I think, truly defining Ukrainian operations. It's this new deep strike doctrine, codenamed Operation Spiderweb.
Hitting targets 4,300 kilometers behind Russian lines. It's incredible.
And finally, we're going to connect all of this to the immense domestic strain inside Russia. There's this growing internal crisis tied to manpower shortages, this invisible army of the missing.
And we'll link that exhaustion directly to the massive, historic decision by the European Union to freeze hundreds of billions in Russian assets. They're funding a reparations loan for Ukraine.
So stick with us, because the shifts we're about to discuss, they really do change the entire calculus for 2026.
They really do.
Okay, let's jump right in. The cold, hard numbers. The Ukrainian General Staff report for December 19th, 12,220 Russian personnel losses in just 24 hours.
It's a staggering number, Alex, but you have to put it in the cumulative context to get the real story.
Right.
Since February 2022, the total estimated Russian casualties are now approaching 1.2 million. The latest is around 11,194,520.
Almost 1.2 million.
Yeah. And we know from UK intelligence that December of last year, 2024, was the single most costly month on record, 48,670 casualties. And that trend of high daily losses, consistently above 1,500, has continued deep into 2025.
So this 12,220 figure, while it's shocking, is actually part of a sustained, brutal pattern.
Exactly. It's a snapshot of a meat grinder that is showing zero signs of slowing down.
And it's not just people, it's the equipment, the operational back end. For that same 24-hour period, we're looking at 18 artillery systems destroyed.
Right, which points directly to how effective Ukrainian counter-battery fire has become.
And then there's this number that just jumps off the page. 111 vehicles and fuel trucks. Gone.
That number is immense, and it highlights this critical vulnerability. Those 18 artillery systems, that's one thing. But the 111 logistics vehicles, that's where the deep insight really lies.
How so?
Well, in 2025 alone, Ukrainian forces have destroyed over 32,600 units of this kind of equipment, fuel tankers, trucks, you name it.
Wait, 32,600. Just in 2025. I feel like that number is bigger than the last few years combined.
That's because it is. You're exactly right. The destruction rate has spiked dramatically. And what this tells us is that the vulnerability of Russian ground lines of communication, the GLOCs, as planners call them, is now the single biggest friction point for their forces.
They just can't get supplies to the front.
They can't sustain the pace. Not for modern warfare. Their logistics columns are just being pulverized by FPV drones and long-range fire.
So when we talk about a logistical system collapsing under this pressure, what does that actually look like for a soldier on the ground?
It looks like desperation. It's tactical regression. Because vehicles, even armored ones, have such a low survival rate, commanders are resorting to these extremely high-risk, low-volume methods.
Like what?
We're seeing small groups, maybe 2 or 3 soldiers, just carrying supplies on foot across open ground, just hoping a drone doesn't spot them.
Wow.
And in some sectors, like near Lyman, we have documented reports of them using pack animals, donkeys.
Donkeys. You're using 19th century transport to evade 21st century drones. That says everything about the state of their military exhaustion.
Precisely. And this exhaustion is being exploited by these really successful Ukrainian operations, which completely shatters the narrative that the front line is some kind of Russian success story.
Right, because the story is always about these slow, costly advances. But the Lyman breakthrough is a perfect example of the opposite. Tell us about that.
This was a huge joint operation, the Third Army Corps working with Ukraine's military intelligence, the HUR, and the result was the near-total destruction of an entire Russian regiment near Lyman.
An entire regiment. On paper, that's up to 2,000 troops.
Up to 2,000 troops either captured or taken out of the fight, but it's more than the numbers. The key was the tactical goal.
Which was?
They successfully straightened the front line, it improved their tactical position, and crucially, it limits Russia's ability to use the Serbryansky Forest for staging future attacks. It's a targeted, effective counterpunch.
Forcing Russia to divert resources they just don't have.
Exactly, and we're seeing a similar momentum shift near Kupiansk, which is a place that Kremlin officials like Gerasimov and Belousov keep claiming they control.
So what's the reality on the ground there?
The ground reality is that Ukrainian forces have successfully reversed those Russian gains. They pulled off a critical counterattack, liberated territory, and most importantly, they broke through to the Oskol River.
And the Oskol River is huge because it's a natural barrier. It cuts Russian supply lines in that sector clean off.
Absolutely. The latest reports from December 17th had the Ukrainian commander-in-chief confirming they had regained control of nearly 90% of the city.
And they did it with drones.
Heavily relying on rapid, drone-supported clearing operations to take out those Russian infiltration pockets. It all ties back to that attrition dynamic we started with.
It really does.
Russia has seized less than 1% of Ukraine's territory in all of 2025. And that tiny gain cost them roughly 83 casualties per square kilometer.
That's not a breakthrough. That's a strategic grinder that yields almost nothing.
It's strategic stasis.
Which forces Ukraine to seek momentum far beyond the trenches, right? Which brings us to this deep strike doctrine, Operation Spiderweb. This feels like a profound qualitative shift in the whole conflict.
It really is. Operation Spiderweb, run by the SBU Ukraine's security service, was designed to just bypass the front lines entirely and hit Russia's strategic depth. We're talking about the air component of their nuclear triad.
The reach they achieved is just staggering.
It is. They used smuggled, assembled quadcopter drones to strike 5 major Russian air bases. And some of these targets were up to 4,300 kilometers from Ukrainian territory.
4,300 kilometers. How do you even do that? How do you get weapons that deep into Russian territory without being detected?
This is where the ingenuity comes in and why the name Spiderweb is so fitting. The drones weren't launched from Ukraine.
Okay.
They were smuggled in parts, hidden inside these modular wooden cabins, like the kind you see on construction sites, and then transported across Russia.
A true spy operation.
It is. Covert agents inside Russia would then assemble the parts on site. They used open-source guidance software and local SIM cards for remote guidance, which makes them incredibly hard to trace back to a central command.
Total deniability. Now, what were the main targets? We're talking about Russia's most irreplaceable assets here, aren't we?
Absolutely. The damage was critical. Confirmed hits on airframes like the Tu-95MS, the Tu-160, and the Tu-22M3 strategic bombers. These planes are not in production anymore. When they're gone for good.
And the intelligence assets. The eyes in the sky.
Critically, they disabled 2 A-50 AWACS radar domes at Ivanovo-Severny. The A-50 is essential for coordinating long-range strikes. Taking out the radar domes is like blinding them.
So what's the total damage claim?
The SBU claims up to 41 aircraft were hit. That's an estimated 34% of their entire strategic cruise missile carrier fleet. The price tag. About $7 billion.
Wow. And the lasting consequence for Russia's bomber doctrine.
They had to redeploy. The surviving strategic bombers were forced thousands of kilometers away to the Far East. And that is not a sustainable solution. It just accelerates mechanical wear on those aging planes. We're talking 23-hour round-trip flights just to launch missiles.
So it's forcing a long-term doctrine shift towards ground-launched missiles.
It has to.
Okay.
And the deep strike campaign is relentless. It continues. Just last week, we saw massive hits in occupied territories.
That was a Belbek airfield strike, right?
It was. December 17th and 18th, SBU drones hit Belbek in Crimea. They took out 2 Nebo SVU radars, a critical S-400 radar, a Panzer system, and a MiG-31 jet. Just a continuous degradation of air defenses.
And it extends to the sea as well, targeting the Black Sea Fleet.
The pressure is intense. On the 14th and 15th, Ukrainian underwater subsea baby drones hit a Kilo-class submarine at Novorossiysk. That reportedly leaves the Black Sea Fleet with only 2 operational Kaliber-capable subs.
Only 2 left.
Yeah.
That's an enormous reduction in their naval power.
It is. And they're even hitting the economic backbone. A drone strike hit a Russian Shadow Fleet tanker, the Valery Gorchakov, near Rostov-on-Don. They are hitting everything: military, air, and economic assets.
All these strikes clearly demonstrate Ukraine's growing leverage. And that brings us to the diplomatic crossroads. So these military realities sinking in, what's the Kremlin's stance on, peace talks?
It remains hardline, maximalist. Putin and other officials are still explicitly committed to the original 2022 war aims: demilitarization, denazification, seizure of historical lands, including Odessa.
No room for negotiation there.
None. Their public statements offer nothing. They even explicitly rejected the idea of a demilitarized buffer zone in Donbass.
How did they manage to kill that idea?
Well, a presidential aide, Ushakov, insisted that if a buffer zone were created, Russia would deploy its National Guard, the Rosgvardia, into it.
But the Rosgvardia has tanks and artillery. They're a military force.
Exactly. Deploying them immediately militarizes the zone, making the whole concept of a buffer totally pointless. It signals zero intent to de-escalate.
Which is such a sharp contrast to President Zelensky, who has signaled he's ready for conditional compromises.
Completely. Zelensky has talked about holding a territorial referendum or elections within 100 days of a codified peace agreement. The door is structurally open on one side
and slam shut on the other. Given that stalemate, the EU's move on December 12th becomes just monumental. Tell us about the freezing of those assets.
It was a colossal decision. The EU agreed to indefinitely freeze 210 billion euros. That's about $247 billion in Russian central bank assets.
And how did they pull that off politically?
They invoked Article 122 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the EU, and that's the key.
Why is that article so important?
Because it relates to situations of severe difficulties caused by exceptional occurrences. It allowed the decision to pass with a qualified majority vote, so they didn't need unanimous agreement. It basically bypassed any single country's veto.
Making the freeze permanent until Russia agrees to pay reparations.
Precisely. And the resulting financial support for Ukraine is historic. This action provides Ukraine with a reparations loan of up to 165 billion euros.
And the genius of it is the repayment structure.
Yes. Ukraine only has to repay this massive sum if and when Russia eventually pays reparations itself. The EU is essentially fronting the cost of reconstruction using frozen Russian sovereign wealth as collateral.
That is a financial commitment that just structurally changes the long-term reality of this war. So let's wrap up by bringing it all back to the stress points for Russia that confirm this state of strategic stasis.
The manpower crisis is still the deepest wound. Defense Minister Belousov claimed 410,000 Russians signed contracts in 2025.
But the math doesn't add up.
It doesn't. That recruitment figure still trails the average monthly casualty figure. Recruitment is perpetually failing to replace losses. It's a cumulative deficit.
And then there's the social crisis of the missing soldiers.
Right. Judicial records confirm this massive MIA crisis. We're talking about 90,000 court claims filed in 2025 just seeking to have missing soldiers declared legally dead.
An invisible army of the missing.
And that creates immense political pressure. 90,000 families left without closure or full benefits. That's a huge crack in the social contract.
And that personnel gap is now so bad, they're deploying foreign troops on Russian soil.
The confirmed deployment of about 14,000 North Korean troops to the Kursk region is a massive strategic signal.
And what are they doing?
High-risk tasks. Engineering, demining near the border. It confirms Russia can't even spare its own reserves to defend its own sovereign territory from border tasks. They have to outsource it because every Russian soldier is needed in the meat grinder.
So to counter this visible exhaustion, Russia is turning to strategic signaling. Nuclear threats.
Yeah.
We saw the new Oreshnik missile system deployed to Belarus.
And the Yars ICBM system on patrol in Siberia. These are desperate attempts to deter Western support by flaunting their nuclear capabilities. It's a projection of strength that masks this deep logistical vulnerability we've been talking about.
The military and financial shifts we've discussed today are just profound, which is why the final piece of news from December 19th is so telling. The UK launching its new military intelligence services, the MIS.
Absolutely. It's a broader Western acknowledgement that the threat from hostile states like Russia extends way beyond the physical battlefield now.
It's cyberspace, global logistics, finance.
Internal sabotage. So it raises this essential question for you, the listener. Considering Ukraine's increasing deep strike capabilities, the effectiveness of Operation Spiderweb, and Europe's unprecedented financial commitment, how will NATO allies further adjust their own national security architecture to counter Russia's persistent Phase Zero threats across Europe in 2026?
A security landscape that has been fundamentally transformed.
It really has.
You've been listening to Defense Report by Alex and Aria, where we analyze the latest in military strategy, global defense, and advanced weaponry.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. We'll catch you next time.